Coming up today on Guts, Grit, and Great Business.
So as content creators, we're trying to educate, we're trying to get people informed, we're also trying to get you to think and then also free you of any limitations and any hesitations that you have in life so that you can go out into this world, you can be your authentic self 100% of the time so that life becomes a wonderful, enjoyable experience regardless of the ups and downs because you are informed, you are educated, and you're free of any limitations. So you're woke and free.
The adventure of entrepreneurship and building a life and business you love, preferably at the same time, is not for the faint of heart. That's why Heather Pierce Campbell is bringing you a dose of guts, grit, and great business stories that will inspire and motivate you to create what you want in your business and life. Welcome to the Guts, Grit, and Great Business Podcast, where endurance is required. Now here's your host, the legal website warrior, Heather Pierce Campbell.
Alrighty. Well, welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach based here in Seattle, Washington. Welcome to another episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business. Today, I'm so excited to be connecting with Natasha Nurse. So we connected recently on LinkedIn, which is one of the main platforms that I use. And I was really excited to come across Natasha's profile because she has such a strong overlap as far as her knowledge and the way that she serves people with the people that I serve. And so I just thought we could have a really fun conversation. Natasha is a coach, she's a speaker, she's a content creator, and a podcast host. So I'm super excited to talk with Natasha about her podcast. And one of the things we were just chatting about before we got started was about the power of creating content and using content as an agent of change. And so I love that. And I have a feeling we've got a lot to dig into. So welcome, Natasha. I'm so happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start off talking about your podcast, right? So we were just chatting about it before we got started. Introduce us to your podcast.
Yeah, so Woke and Free is a podcast that I started with my husband. It's going to be we're approaching the 3-year mark, which is really exciting. We started it in 2017 on my birthday. And the reason my husband and I started it is because we are both like very passionate people and we have different perspectives. I'm like hardcore liberal. He's hardcore not. And we've always had these really dynamic conversations, and we wanted to bring that to the forefront for a couple of reasons as in a podcast form. We as two young Black professionals, we wanted to put out the messaging that like Black love really exists and it can be really dynamic and really empowering and positive. We've been together this September will be 16 years, and we've been married now it will be 7 years. So it's like we met each other freshman year at Penn State and been together ever since. And so we wanted to promote like positive love and, doing something together that's empowering as a couple. But then secondly, and I would say even most importantly, is the power of content in the sense that we were listening to people having really interesting conversations, things about lifestyle, about politics, about business, about anything you can think of, and not always maybe hearing the most educated or the most informed opinions out there in the world, because as you know, everyone can just turn on a camera, press record, and just kind of go at it with life. But, we really have to be careful about what we come to the table with, because not everyone's going to go and do their due diligence. Not everyone's going to go and research and figure out, hey, is what that guy said, is that true? Is that real life, or is that just like something in someone's mind? And that's a dangerous proposition, because as we deal right now, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're dealing with racial tensions that we've been dealing with since the beginning of the country. And it's, now really kind of exploding. And people need to understand, what does Black Lives Matter really mean? How do we really fight COVID? Like, there's so many things that people have questions about, and we wanted to be a voice of, hey, these are some resources, these are our opinions, this is why this is an informed opinion, now you think about it and make your own informed opinion. And that's what Woke and Free is really all about.
Oh, I love that. I feel like there's so much to dig into there. I want to backtrack just a little bit to get to know you a little better. So I have five, and I think it's so cool, first of all, that you and your husband are doing a podcast together. Like, hats off to you, because I know a lot of people where that would not go well for them.
Aw, no, it can be done. We're very different, and if you listen to the show, you'll hear I'm like all the way left on something, and he's all the way right, or vice versa. But I think what's important, especially in a marriage and building a relationship, the foundation of our relationship is honesty, and also we're together because we need to make each other better. So that's through conversation, that's through creating, and it's also we want to be the change we want to see in this world, right? We both come from kind of broken families, and we want to create some type of legacy where young kids can see, wow, you can be with someone for 20, 30 years. Wow, you can create something with someone. And so we just wanted to put that out there. But I think for us, it's something we look forward to. We have a new episode every Wednesday. So it's like Woken Free Wednesdays. And it's also, kind of a testimony to our love story. And so just having that there, it's wild listening to yourself. But it's also so enjoyable to hear his voice or to hear his thoughts and be like, oh, and every time we have conversations, we're like, we got to talk about this on the podcast. So it's like it's ingrained in our life now. It's really an incredible experience.
Yes. Well, that's amazing. I mean, kudos to you guys for making that work and for exploring those conversations, even in the context of a podcast. I think that could be really challenging to do. So I want to get into that, and I want people to know. So I have this list of 5 things to know about Natasha. So you can tell me whether or not these are true, but it's really cute. It says she is a Virgo. She is obsessed with elephants. She loves the library, film, television, audiobooks, podcasts, and social media. She believes retail therapy is a real thing, and her life motto, learn something new and meet someone new every day.
Yes, that's 100% accurate.
I love it. No, I love these little details that make somebody actually come to life. So I'm curious, talk to me about your obsession with elephants. When did that start?
Yeah, so I've always been obsessed with animals. Like I went to Penn State, I was in a pre-vet program. You couldn't tell me nothing. At the age of like 6 or 7, I was like, I'm going to be a veterinarian. And had I known what vets really do, I would have changed that life ambition. But nonetheless, you live and you learn. And for me, I think animals, why I love animals is because I think that their love is sacred. And I think that human beings, most of the time, we don't even deserve their love because it's so unconditional, right? People we love with conditions and certain traditions and certain concepts and constructs in mind. But animals, like my dog, he just literally wants to love me. And it doesn't matter how I look. It doesn't matter where I'm from. It doesn't matter how I sound. It's just, I love you, mom, right? And people, unfortunately, I feel sometimes don't love you the same way. And with elephants, they're just such an interesting animal. I mean, their massive size is just, I'm just like, oh my God, I want to give you a bear hug. You're so adorable. I can't even. And then, it's a matriarchal society. They have incredible memories. They can walk like thousands of miles and to go back to an original spot, how they mourn their dead. I mean, they're sacred animals. There's like, I forget if it's in Hindu. I think it's in Hindu. Isn't there like an elephant god? Or something like that. Like they're so there. And I also have several. I have 2 elephant tattoos. So I plan to hopefully get more down the road. But yeah, I think they're magical. And like if I could reincarnate into an elephant, that would definitely be on the bucket list.
Well, I love that. We are big nature fans here. In fact, we, after I record this episode, we're headed out to find nature, and we watch a lot of nature shows, especially because of COVID. And it's, elephants really are phenomenal. I mean, they are just extraordinary animals. So I love that. I was hoping there was a backstory, and I'm glad that it tied into your background about going to veterinary school. So my dad was actually a veterinarian. And that's what he went to school for. And he practiced vet medicine for the first handful of years. And we lived in the middle of Idaho at the time. And so it became like a charitable endeavor for him to be engaged in veterinary medicine. So he actually went bankrupt. We lost our house and moved, and he had to choose something else to do. So, but he is a total animal lover. We grew up with animals. We all have a love for animals. So I relate very strongly to that. There was a time where I was reading the book series, All Animals, Great and Small. Who's the guy that writes? There, anyways, it's a book series that talks about a veterinarian's life and his experience with animals. So the other interesting thing is that you went to law school.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So my career has been really interesting. So like I mentioned, I went to Penn State thinking I was going to be a vet. And then 3 weeks on campus, I saw a pig get slaughtered in front of me. And it was probably one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. And I knew at that moment that this was definitely not my jam. And I needed to pivot, and I needed to kind of go a different direction. So started thinking about things. And I stumbled upon like taking some business and law classes. And I loved it because as a Virgo, most Virgos know they love, well, we can fall in a couple of categories. Some of us like really love structure and order. Some of us not so much. But I am all about like, I think in checklists. I'm always like, okay, guys, we're having a meeting. What are we doing next? Like, I love order and structure. My dad was in the British Air Force. And so I also am influenced strongly by being militant in nature that way. And I loved it. So I applied to New York Law School. I got in, and then of course, perfect timing, the economy crashed. So I had to, in 2008, I had to pivot again, but it was fine. I mean, I graduated cum laude. I loved my experience there, but the market, for those of you in New York who know, there's a lawyer every square foot you go, and I had to kind of change it up. So ironically, my first job was in sales, and I was doing cold call sales. It was very interesting. But actually, again, one of the most pivotal things I've ever learned, because anything you do in this world involves sales. You have to know how to present and how to sell yourself or a product or a service. And it set me up for going down a non-traditional path. I got into education, legal sales, and then kind of was able to branch off and do more entrepreneurial consulting, podcasting, media creation path. And I would say that my legal background, I mean, I am, still like a New York licensed attorney. I would say, it helped formulate how I view the world, how I articulate, how confident I am in a conversation, and then also just like thinking about the consequences and parameters, right? Because lawyers were all about like what are the things that can go wrong in a scenario, and it's good because whether you get into business or whatever, most people I don't think about the consequences enough, but that's all lawyers think about. We're like, what is the liability? And it's been helpful because as you start new ventures, I can always kind of tap in that part of my brain and say, okay, what are the legal parameters in a way that maybe other people wouldn't?
Yes. Well, it's absolutely true. And I know that, I mean, for most people that I talk to, you never regret an education, whether or not you end up working in that field or not. But it's fascinating that you've got the sales background as well, right? So many people that I've talked to recently, and when I ask them, how did you get started down the entrepreneurial path? The number one response has been sales. They learned sales. Right. And that allowed them to create a business, and like singularly, that was the thing that allowed them to know how to go out and create a business. And so, there's the saying that, we are all in the business of sales. We just happen to be selling, right, our particular thing. But the business really, we're all sales experts or not, and marketing people first. And we just happen to have a business in a different category. But so, so talk to us about where you're at now. You're in Arizona. You have been running this podcast for 3 years. I love that. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Talk to us about what you're up to currently.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the podcast, it's been great because we recently we're hitting our year mark of we changed our hosting. So now we're on the Podbean platform. So shout out to all the other people who host their podcasts on Podbean. It's a great platform, a really great resource. So I think for us now, next is we are wanting to dip into other forms of content that broaden the brand. So we're working on a book and getting that out. We're working on wanting to produce and create some film content, because for us, Woke and Free is definitely more than a podcast. It's a way of living, and we want to continue to use our voice and our creativity to create content that makes people think, that entertains you, and then also inspires you to go out and do the same in your own life. So whether it's how you communicate, how you consume content, and or how you create content. So that's the next step, just kind of really broadening and taking Woke and Free as wide and as far as possible.
Well, I love that. And I think you're right. It's more than a podcast. It's a way of life. It's a message, or even just a principle that you live by. And I think you already touched on it, but describe again for people who are listening, what does it mean to be woke and free?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, we came up with the word woke and free by the idea that, like, in life, there's no guidebook, there's no instruction list that's provided to you to figure out who you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to think and how you're supposed to act. But you have to kind of go on this journey and learn something new and meet new people every single day to figure out what this whole experience is going to be for you. And for us, to be woke and free is to be educated. It's to open up your eyes and see injustice. It's to understand when something's wrong and when it's time for you to do something, either on your own or through your support. But we all have a responsibility in making this world a better place. And you can do it through your checkbook, you can do it through your time, you can do it through activism, whatever it is, but we all have to do something to make this world the world we want it to be for ourselves, and of course, more importantly, for the ones that come after us, because what we're doing today is going to impact the youth, and we have to think about that now. We can't just say, oh, it's someone else's problem, because all children are here because of adults' decisions.
That's
so
right.
we have to do the right thing, and we have to take care of that. And freedom, to be free in life, is to live on your own terms, unapologetically. I think for me, I've always prided myself on being Natasha, and whether you love me or not, I can only be myself because everyone else is taken. So I try, and my husband is the same. We try to just be honest, just keep it 100%, because at the end of the day, the people who will love and respect that will rock with you, and they'll rock with you for life. And the ones who don't, if they're like, that's not my flavor, cool. Well, there's someone else out there for you. So as content creators, we're trying to educate, we're trying to get people informed, we're also trying to get you to think, and then also free you of any limitations and any hesitations that you have in life, so that you can go out into this world, you can be your authentic self 100% of the time, so that life becomes a wonderful, enjoyable experience, regardless of the ups and downs, because you are informed, you are educated, and you're free of any limitations. So you're woke and free.
Well, I love that. And the earlier in life we can learn that lesson about what it really means to be ourselves and to shed any, the ideas that we carry around that came from other people about who we should be. And it's just a natural part of life. We all end up with a few of those stuck to us, right? It's our job to take those off and peel them off. Well, and it's, and I love the framing behind that, and the fact that it's on each of us to become educated and informed. I was listening to something recently, especially in light of Black Lives Matter, what's happening in the news. People are, and from all walks of life, really experiencing some major shifts right now in what's happening. And can be overwhelming for me as a white person to figure out, like, I know I want to play an active role and do the right thing and be the kind of person who shows up even in the tough times. And yet, as a mom of two little people, somebody running a business, it's really hard for me to figure out, how do I balance it all? How do I prioritize, do all the things? And there was somebody I was listening to actually on somebody else's podcast, and he said, look, to everybody listening, you all don't have to do everything, but you all have to do something. And I just thought, oh,
Absolutely.
if we can just take that every day and be like, okay, I don't have to do everything, but I do have to do something, it makes it feel much more doable, much more like, okay, I got this. Like, we can figure this out. This is a path that we can go down, and I can play my role and do my part, because I can get really overwhelmed as a mom. I mean, I think we were talking even right before I went live on this interview, like watching the news as a mom to two little people, like I can get easily overwhelmed because I'm also a doer. I'm a huge action taker, and I have a lot of activation energy. And yet, I can get into the place of like running too many directions or doing too much, and also worrying that I'm not doing enough, right? And so, one of the things that I love that you sent over in, your summary and your bio is this question of, why is it important to discuss taboo topics? Will you share with us a little bit about that, either in the context of your podcast or in the context of, what's happening right now with current events?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important to talk about taboo topics because we can't ignore them, right? They can't be that elephant in the room. We, especially as, when you are a parent, it's your responsibility, right, to try to make sure that your kids feel comfortable and that they know that they can come to you about anything, including the, the not so easy conversations to have. And as adults, I would say as a Black person growing up, there were things that were said in my household or things that I've experienced that I didn't always feel free to be able to discuss, and it haunts you, and it doesn't make life easier. It makes it harder because it feels like then you're not woken free and that you're living with masks on, right? So I have to be this person for school, right? I grew up in Lower East Side Manhattan, and Stuyvesant Town, anyone who knows that area, and I was one of the few Black kids in my school, and it wasn't always easy, and I didn't really have a lot of friends, and I didn't have spaces to be able to talk about how I was feeling when people commented on my size or my color or my hair. And it got harder as I got older. I was grateful to go to Penn State and be able to meet my husband and to actually dive into Black identity, because my parents come from a Caribbean background, that my mom and dad are from Jamaica. And so even within the Black conversation, it's not just one Black narrative, right? There's Black people from Africa, there's Black African Americans, then there's Caribbean Black people, and how your Blackness is like, it's a unique and individual narrative. And in the household, there's certain things that, within a Caribbean household that might be said that might not be said in an African, or might not be said in an African American household. So like, our podcast is also just like a wonderful, wonderful reprieve to be able to talk about colorism. We talked about that and how that's affected us, and how people don't like to talk about skin color, and how it's shown that people, if you're lighter skinned, you can have easier opportunities, or it's easier to do this, that, and the other. And then what it's like on the inverse when you're darker skinned, or talking about sexuality and talking about exploitation and things like that, where maybe you don't feel comfortable talking about that at the job. But these conversations still have to be had because you have thoughts on that and your voice matters. So for us, we've also thought of our podcast and used our podcast as an outlet of, even if we can't talk to anyone else about this, we can at least talk to each other in our marriage about this, but we can also have an educated and thought-provoking conversation in media, where if other people similarly have ideas and thoughts about this, they too can join the conversation, because there aren't enough safe spaces to just be yourself. And that's unfortunate, but I think with Black Lives Matter and the movement kind of refusing to stop being heard, I think more and more spaces in like corporate America they're going to have to start to listen. They're going to have to start to hear, what is it like to be a Black professional? What is it like to be a Latina professional? What's it like to be a trans professional? Like, people have to be heard, and their voices have to matter, in not just on an individual or community basis, but also in their work lives, in their marriages, like across the board. So, taboo topics exist, whether we want them to or not, but what do we do about them? How do we address them? And how do we make sure that people don't feel so alone? Because for many, many years before I met my husband, I felt very, very alone and not feeling like I had anyone to talk to. And it's a rough way to grow up that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so much we could dig into around that conversation. One of the things that I'm really grateful for right now, so we live in North Seattle, and there's quite a bit of cultural diversity in the school systems that we're in. Not always. Like, one of the things I remember when we went to actually explore schools for my son, and he's special needs, and so there were a variety of things that we were looking for. But I remember going to one school that came like highly rated, but I showed up and it was all white people, and they had a requirement that both parents had to spend like 40 hours a week each school year working at the school or contributing to the school. And like, the first thought that I had is like, this is automatically going to exclude people below certain incomes. And there's going to be, right. And it automatically explained really quickly, like, why there was not a lot of diversity, at least from my perspective, what I was seeing. And I came home and I told my husband, like, that's not a fit for us. Like, having seen where we live, like, one of the things that I care a lot about, including from a public education standpoint, is that my kids are involved in a school that embraces diversity and teaches it and has open conversations about it. And so one of the things I'm really grateful for is we ended up in one of those schools, and that they've been very vocal and sending daily emails and resources for parents. And I look at what's happening right now, and I contrast it with how I grew up, which is pretty much that race wasn't talked about at all. Like, it was a non-conversation, even though we were aware of it as kids. It's a little bit that I think at least I can speak for my perception of what my parents' generation as white people were going through is like, oh, if we don't talk about race, maybe that's what doesn't make us a racist. Right? Like, if we don't talk about it and we don't address it and we don't act like it's a thing, it's a little bit like, folks who say, oh, I just don't see color. Well, no, that's not true. We all see reality. We might experience it differently, but I look at just kind of the absence of conversation that happened from my growing up experience. And I just don't want any part of that for my children moving forward.
Yeah. I commend you for even having the wokeness and the consciousness to be able to identify that, because a lot of people even fail to look at their own life experience and say, hey, how many people did I speak to that didn't look like me, that came from different backgrounds? And I think that's a conversation we all can have. As a Black person, I don't think it's okay to just say you only explored your own community, because there's so many different cultures and communities in this world. Me and my husband talk about the fact that we wish that, for some communities, there's like a pilgrimage where you can go to like Israel or Mecca, and you can explore your history. I wish in America that we had like a pilgrimage that required kids starting at like the age of 12 to like travel to a different continent every year up until you're 18, so that you interact with people from different cultures, from different backgrounds, because people are remarkable and people are so magnificent and interesting, and we live in a bubble, and when we think about news, we think about our local news and then maybe our national news, but like, I care about what's going on in Ghana. I care about what's going on in Australia. I care about what's going on in China. Like, we're one race, the human race.
That's right.
And we're on one planet. So we need to think about ourselves from a global perspective, because otherwise we silo ourselves and then we devalue each other. I mean, even when you think about what's going on with police brutality, the problem, one of the things I think is happening is lack of training, lack of understanding, but there's also a lack of connection in our community, right? It's a lot easier to kill someone when you don't know them, when you have no connection to that community. But if cops and law enforcement were integrated in our communities, where they know Uncle John and they know Nancy down the block and they know Amy across the street, it's going to be a lot harder to put your knee on that person's neck. Yeah. If you knew that, right? We have to get more connected. I think as I've gotten older, I think we as a society are getting more and more disconnected. And I don't blame social media. I know people like to go that route. Nope.
Yeah.
That's just an excuse. I think it's made it easier, right? It's definitely made it easier for us to just like send a text or send a Facebook message, but not really sit there and think about how are we serving each other? How are we serving ourselves? How are we integrated in our society? Like when we moved to Arizona, we were like, whoo, it's 106 degrees. It's so hot. But did a single neighbor come out? No, right? Like we've been here over a year. Do we know any neighbors? No, right? And that's scary that you can live in a community and people are totally fine not knowing who's next door. And that is symptomatic of a bigger problem in this country.
Well, and that's that example, hits home for me because I grew up in a smaller community, right? So Walla Walla, it's a small town, eastern side of the state. And, we knew most people, at least it felt that way, right? We roamed the neighborhood. Like it's a totally different growing up experience than what my kids are having now in Seattle. And we got on our bicycles and we knew all of our neighbors and, we ding donged their doorbells and ran and hit, it was all the things. But in Seattle, I find like you have to be much more intentional about going out of your way to watch for and connect with and find your neighbors because it is so easy to pass each other at odd times and like literally never see anybody, but it's still on us to be part of creating community. And the other thing I love about your point of taking on a global perspective is I agree with you so strongly that if people had the chance or created the opportunity to do more traveling, to engage with people from other cultures, it would really broaden their perspective. I remember when I was in high school, I wanted to travel, right? I just thought, man, for kids, and we had a sister high school set up with a school in Japan, and then there was there were some other classes because several languages were taught at our high school, right? So there was Spanish, there was French, there was Japanese, and I was in both French and Spanish. And the reason why I was taking Spanish is because we had quite a few Spanish speaking students, right? It's an agricultural center in Eastern Washington. And so we had quite a few Spanish speaking students. And I remember just feeling the weight of like being in school with these kids and wondering what it's like not to speak English and be trying to assimilate, trying to go to school. And I thought, I can't fix many problems, but I can take Spanish and I can try to learn how to communicate with kids that I'm in school with. And so I added Spanish, and then I ended up, long story short, getting myself onto several school trips that went to like Japan. Twice I went to Japan during high school, and I went to France and Spain. And even that early experience, because my parents said, if you can save up your money and pay for it yourself, you can go. And so I did. And
Nice.
but I remember getting to the end of those trips and feeling like grief, like getting back onto a bus. Like I remember spending 2.5 weeks there, right? And you're with a host family and you've been in this community of kids at this high school. And I remember like sitting with the profound understanding that I may not see these people ever again. And it was really like this deep sense of grief. Anyways, and since that time, like there was a time in college, I went to Mexico and I lived there and taught English for a time. And, similarly, being able to see the way that people live and work and show up. I mean, I have so much respect for those communities that I got to interact with and be a part of for a time. And I think the true is same here in our own neighborhoods, in our own cities across the US. If we could physically be in and among people that, and have more exposure, we would all be better off.
Absolutely. Yeah. But at least that's a wonderful context for you to be able to know how you can shape and design how your kids experience this world. As they come up, you'll think about, what it was like to go to Japan, what it was like to go to Mexico, what it was like to go to France, and say, you're this age, you're going to do this, and so that's a wonderful like tradition that you can actually start and make that culturing, not just a dream, but a reality for your own family and hopefully, create kind of a generational trend there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the case that, we all we all can't do everything, but we all can do something, right?
Yeah,
And when it comes to
absolutely.
awareness and connection and cultural diversity and just opening up our perspectives, there's a lot, truthfully, that we all can do. So what
Absolutely.
are, as your experience right now as a Black woman in the midst of what we're experiencing on a national level, on lots of like little pockets locally too, like Seattle's been all over the news for, it seems like months now for a variety of reasons. But
Mhm.
what are what are the conversations that you wish everybody was having? What are the conversations or some of the topics that, for example, you and your husband tackled together that you would want to bring to the listeners of this podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. That's an incredible question. I would say the simple question of like, what can I do? Right.
Yeah,
And what are you willing to do? So yes, you might not be able to do everything at once, but like you accurately said, we can all do something. So, when it comes to things that you love, things that are in your wheelhouse, things that you're good at, how can you help with the movement, right? So there's so many different things within, and I would say for the Black Lives Matter movement, just so everyone's on the same page, for us, or for at least for me, how I interpret it is it's not about saying that all lives don't matter. It's about saying that Black lives are currently threatened,
that's
currently
right.
endangered. Not all
That's right.
lives can go. Not all people can go outside and feel like they might not be able to come home. Versus that's what's currently and has been the case for Black people in this country for a very long time. So that's why the Black Lives Matter movement. It's not the antithesis of life. It's the proactive focus on protecting Black lives.
Yes.
So what can we all do to help Black lives? So it depends on, again, what's in your wheelhouse. So if you're in a corporation and there isn't a mentorship program for people, for young people or college students, then maybe you might want to start that or talk about how you can be a part of making that happen and making sure that people from different backgrounds come into that mentorship program, learn about engineering, learn about business, learn about finance, whatever space you're in. Having diversity is a good thing. It's a part of having innovation, and it's also a part of how you can grow businesses and practices. So that's one thing. Some people, maybe it's more about a financial thing, and you're like, you know what, this school doesn't have the proper equipment for the kids or the, whatever level it is. So, there's different things we can do. So I think I would love for everyone to just take a good look at themselves in the mirror and say, what can I do today? Not, I don't know what to do, but what can I do? So what do I like to do? I like to give money. I like to give my time. I like to start initiatives. I like to write, right? If you're a media person, if you're a journalist, have you covered an article around Black Lives Matter? Are you providing content around positive Black news? Right? Like there's so many different outlets and things to do to promote positive Black narratives and positive Black things, regardless for businesses. How many people who want to support Black businesses, that would be incredibly important at this time, right? Especially with COVID. Businesses are closing left and right.
Yes.
Black businesses would love and welcome that type of support. So I think the biggest thing is, what can I do and what am I willing to do, and create that action plan for yourself today, not like next week, 2 months from now, today, because action that is planned and strategic and formidable now will have lasting effect later. But we have to do something now, and we can't just let it go under the rug. And for those who are in law enforcement, for those who listen to the show, I would just encourage you to take a good look at how you're viewing people and what exactly is the issue for some people, right? Because there's some people who seem to have the intent to want to harm. And if you're in law enforcement, one would think that you should be in this game because you have a deep motivational spirit about wanting to protect others. And so I would ask, do Black lives deserve less protection than others? Right? And if so, why do you think that? And really explore it, because sometimes we have certain ideas and biases, and it is what it is. It's a part of this human journey and this experience. But I ask that people really take a look and say, because some people have even take offense to the term Black Lives Matter, and it's like, you're offended
Yeah.
by the idea that one community matters. why, right? I'm not even going to get emotional on that. Let's dive deep there, right? Like, because people have to understand if that offends you, then there's something else going on there with you. And it's important to dive deep and cut to that, because maybe you grew up in a household where Black people weren't spoken well of. Maybe you grew up in a household where the only time you saw Black people were when they were being arrested on cops, right? Like there's a lot of contextual things that go into what it means to be a human. I mean, even when I went to Penn State, I was surprised that like a couple of people came up to me and said, I've never met a Black person. You guys aren't so bad, right? Like, and that's crazy.
That is totally crazy.
And I was attacked there. I was called the N-word at the age of 6. So I've experienced racism and bigotry, and people just, hating me for something that I cannot change. And so, okay, but like, why? Why does my life matter less? Why does your life matter more? And why can't we live in harmony? Because I think also with the movement, it's not about, I've never heard any Black person say, I want special treatment. We just want equal treatment.
No.
Right? That's all I want. I don't want to be treated specially. I just want to be treated equally so that I get the same mortgage rate as someone else. I get shown the same houses as someone else, and not shown the hood or the disenfranchised areas. When I apply for a job, I'm considered for the same salary as someone else. It's the same. It's just equality. And that is a statement that branches across all races, all creeds, all nationalities, all sexual orientations. Like, we just need equality in this world. People can rise as they rise based on their own merit, but we owe it to ourselves to give people a fighting chance. And that's only through equality.
That's right. Well, and I think that you've touched on something that is critical to this conversation, which is that people can't begin to do the work. They can't begin to make even the small changes if they're not willing to look. They're not willing to look at themselves or question, wait, do I have this opinion or do I have this belief somewhere, even if it's not something I intentionally created? Like, is it there? And in my experience, and I've still got a lot to learn about how to have this dialogue with other white people in a way that does not cause extreme triggering and just closing off to the conversation, right? But it's my work to do. And I'm clear that it's all of our work to do. But I think a huge part of it is just a willingness to look, a willingness to sit with, like, what is rooted inside from a belief perspective. What did I get fed as a child or as a young adult that has led to me holding certain beliefs or having a certain paradigm about the world? And it's only until we look at that can we change it. Can we dig in and actually do the work that comes next?
Absolutely. And that's for everyone, right? Whether you're white, Hispanic, Asian, Black, we all have these deep-rooted biases and ideas and constructs that are detrimental to other communities, which ultimately means it's detrimental to ourselves, because we're viewing people through those lenses, then we're not really seeing people. We're seeing those stigmas, we're seeing those stereotypes, and it's stulting. It's halting us from being able to have positive and amazing relationships with people that don't look like us, that don't sound like us. And it's making the world a worse place, because we can't connect, because we're like, nope, that person, oh, they steal, or oh, this person does this and this, and it's like, nope, it's a human being. Judge everyone based on their creed, not the color of their skin, right? Who are you as a person? If that person is a swindler, okay, then don't give them your money. But don't assume they're a swindler because of how they look or how they sound or where they come from.
That's right. No, that's right. We have to check ourselves. And it was really interesting because I had an event happen in a parking garage, and I later was trying to unpack it with my sister, because basically I was walking, as a single woman, and it's a large parking garage attached to like a hospital complex, and I had an appointment to get to. And so I was walking through, and this man, right, this Black man steps out and asks me a question. Hey, can I get your help? And immediately I was a little bit on edge. And even later I was like, okay, was I on edge because I was alone? It was a parking garage and I would have been on edge regardless. Was I on edge because it was a Black man? Like, I really was trying to understand. And I slowed myself down in that moment. And I just thought, okay, regardless of whatever internal, anything I've got going on. And I later, I think it was just the fact that I was alone and being approached in a parking garage, which just felt kind of, kind of dark and enclosed, right? But I slowed down and I thought, what would I do? Whether this was a white man or a black man or any person, what would I do? First of all, to make sure that safety is a priority, right? And it turns out he was asking me about how to connect a baby seat, a safety seat in his car, right? And so my first thought is like, I wouldn't follow a white man to his car, right? Like regardless. And so I just said, well, hey, can you show me the child seat? Do you have the instructional pamphlet, right? And he got them both out and I had him bring them to the front of the car so that I wasn't going anywhere near the doors, right? But we worked through it. And it turns out like, he didn't know how to connect the child seat. We looked through it and we got it sorted out. And I said, I think this is what you're looking for. And, anyways, we worked through it and he was like, great, that helps so much. It turns out he was a new dad and had never connected the car seat before. And they can be crazy. Anybody who's ever tried to connect a car seat, like they really, there's some terrible statistic about like 80% of people get those wrong. Like there's a reason you're supposed to, it's really, it's crazy how complicated they can make the whole contraption, but you are supposed to especially if you're a new parent, you're supposed to take that child seat and like drive your car to one of the checkpoints where they will check it and make sure that it's all secure and set up the right way. But I just like that later, I still was thinking about that. And I've tried, in my own way to be very aware of like, what is my initial reaction and how do I respond in a way that is truthfully and aligned with my values? Yeah.
That's incredible. And thank you for sharing that. Cause that's not easy to share. Right. And I commend you for, again, diving deep because myself included, unfortunately, we live in a world where, safety is not guaranteed. So when you are in a parking lot by yourself, it is scary and it shouldn't be, but unfortunately, this is the world that we live in and people, do have bad intentions. Thankfully, he was just trying to get his life together with the baby cars. But that's great that you were able to help him because some people probably would have said no. They would have assumed he was trying to harm them in some way. And it's like, nope, just trying to be a dad.
Right. Yes. Well, and I just thought, if I could slow down, because I remember pausing in the middle of the garage and just thinking, okay, if it's about safety, then what would I do to keep myself safe? Is there a way that I can help him and still stay safe, right? And so I thought, okay, I'm going to stay towards the center or the middle of the parking garage and not go to the back end where it's darker behind the cars. You know what I mean? So it was just basic. But I was really grateful actually for the opportunity to examine that in myself and also in the moment take a proactive role and be like, okay, so just by observing, maybe each time I can be more aware and make sure that anytime I'm really interacting with anybody, I'm just staying aware and really taking steps and responding in a way that's consistent with my values and not something that's been totally ingrained by media or our culture or the other messages that we get sent that are massively wrong.
Absolutely.
Well, so much of when you were speaking today, I can totally hear the coach in you. So I know that you're a coach. I know that you're a speaker. Share with us for people that want to get in touch, that want to learn more about you. And by the way, if you're listening, I will be sharing all of Natasha's information in my show notes. So you can visit those at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. So Natasha, I will share anything that you would like to share there. But how do you like to connect with people? You want me to send them to your podcast? Do you want them to get in touch if they're interested in knowing more?
I think so. I think that would be phenomenal. I think if anyone is interested in woken free living as well, then just go to wokenfree.com. So that's WOKENFREE.com. And there you'll be able to get our social media handles. If you want to reach us via email, wokenfree@gmail.com. And then, yes, outside of the podcast, I coach, I speak. And so that's on my Dressing Room 8 platform. But that you can find me at dressingroom8.com. But I think the podcast, for people So if they're listening to you, they're podcast fans, I think that this is a conversation that hopefully will make them think, laugh, and come back for more every Wednesday. So I hope to hear people on the show and have them, share their comments and just be open, right? Just open to this incredible conversation we've had, and just be open to more conversations. The more we talk, the more we think, the more that we can grow and really enhance as people.
Yes. Well, I love that. I so appreciate your voice. I'm so glad you took the time to join me today. I know you've got a free gift to share with the audience, and it's around starting a podcast. Do you want to share for a minute on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if they go to welcomefree.com, there is a tab that says you want to start a podcast. So if people are thinking about, hey, I have a message to share with the world, we do free kind of strategy sessions. So feel free, once they go to welcomefree.com, they'll fill out a contact form, which will allow us to get in touch with you based on what you're looking to do. I think, and we just recently had an episode about should you start a podcast? So I think, is a podcast for everyone? Not necessarily. We talk about that in episode 148. So definitely check that out. But I would say if you just want to even have just a strategy session on what do you have to do to get started from a tool perspective, from a social media build out perspective, from a calendaring perspective, just the strategy and the practicalness of what it means to do this. Because as you know, this is no easy feat. It's a labor of love, but it's so worth it. And you definitely made my day with this conversation.
Well, thank you, Natasha. I'm so happy to have had you on the show. I will share that link as well for people that are interested in a podcasting strategy session. I highly recommend you connect with Natasha if you're listening. Natasha, I'm grateful for you. I hope we get the chance to connect again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on the Guts, Grit, and Great Business Podcast. We hope that we've added a little fuel to your tank, some coffee to your cup, and pep in your step to keep you moving forward in your own great adventures. For key takeaways, links to any resources mentioned in today's show and more, see the show notes, which can be found at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, and if you enjoyed today's conversation, please give us some stars and a review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast so others will find us too. Keep up the great work you are doing in the world, and we'll see you next week.